The day Samuel Carter lost everything, he thought the silence would be the hardest part. He was wrong. Where are you watching from? Tell us your city and country in the comments. The hardest part was realizing that the people you once trusted can look you in the eye and walk away without a second thought. A cold rain tapped against the courthouse windows as Samuel stepped out into the parking lot, carrying 2 worn suitcases and the last pieces of a life he had spent more than 3 decades building. At 68 years old, the retired Army veteran stood motionless beneath the gray sky, staring across rows of wet vehicles while the final words from his ex-wife echoed in his mind. "You'll die alone on that mountain." She had spoken them calmly, almost casually, as if she were commenting on the weather instead of closing the door on 34 years of marriage. Samuel tightened his grip on the suitcase handle and forced himself to keep moving. There was no point looking back. The court had awarded her the house, the savings, and nearly everything they had accumulated together. What remained was an aging pickup truck, a small monthly pension, and the one companion who had never abandoned him. Rex waited quietly in the passenger seat, his large German Shepherd frame silhouetted behind rain-speckled glass. The dog immediately sat upright when Samuel opened the door. Those intelligent brown eyes studied him carefully, as if searching for answers Samuel himself did not have. For a moment, neither moved. Then Rex gently rested his head against Samuel's shoulder. The simple gesture nearly broke him. Samuel swallowed hard and started the engine. The old truck rumbled to life as they pulled away from town. Mile after mile of highway stretched ahead beneath dark clouds. There was nowhere left to go except the place he had spent years trying to forget. High in the mountains of western Montana stood a cabin that had once belonged to his father. The property had been abandoned for nearly 20 years. Most people probably assumed it had already collapsed into the forest. As evening approached, the winding mountain road became narrower and rougher. Pine trees crowded the edges of the trail. Fog drifted between the slopes. When the cabin finally appeared through the mist, it looked even worse than Samuel remembered. The porch sagged. Several windows were boarded. Tall weeds covered the yard. Yet somehow, standing there in the fading light, Samuel felt something he had not felt all day. Relief. It wasn't much, but at least nobody could take this place from him. He unloaded the truck while Rex explored the property. The dog moved slowly through the overgrown grass, sniffing corners of the cabin and disappearing briefly behind the old woodshed. Darkness settled over the mountain. Samuel carried the last box inside and lit a lantern. The empty cabin groaned softly as wind moved through the trees outside. Then he heard it. A single bark. Sharp. Unusual. Rex rarely barked without reason. Samuel stepped back onto the porch and saw the German Shepherd standing beside the truck. The dog wasn't looking at the woods. He wasn't looking at the cabin. He was staring directly at a weathered envelope sticking halfway out from beneath the driver's seat. An envelope Samuel had never seen before. Samuel frowned and pulled the envelope free from beneath the driver's seat. The paper was yellowed with age, its edges worn and brittle. There was no stamp, no address, only his name written across the front in familiar handwriting. His breath caught. "That cannot be possible," he whispered. Rex sat beside him, ears forward, watching closely. Samuel turned the envelope over. The seal had never been broken. For several seconds, he simply stared at it. Then he slowly opened the flap and unfolded a single sheet of paper. The lantern light flickered as his eyes moved across the first line. "Samuel, if you are reading this, then life has probably knocked you down harder than I ever wanted for you." Samuel lowered the paper. His father had been gone nearly 20 years. Yet hearing those words felt as if the old man were standing beside him again. "How did this get here?" he murmured. Rex responded with a soft huff. Samuel managed a tired smile. Good question, partner, he continued reading. Some things were never safe enough to leave in a bank. Some truths were never safe enough to tell out loud. If everything else has been taken from you, come home and follow the instructions I left behind. Samuel's heartbeat quickened. He glanced toward the dark cabin windows. Outside, the wind moved through the pines with a low whisper. He kept reading. Under the floorboards of the workshop, you will find a metal box. Inside is a map. Trust the map. Trust the dog. Samuel blinked and reread the sentence. Trust the dog. You hearing this, Rex? The German Shepherd immediately lifted his head. Apparently, you are part of the plan. Rex thumped his tail once against the porch. For the first time all day, Samuel laughed quietly. It felt strange, almost unfamiliar. He returned to the letter. There are people who would not understand what they find. If you reach this point, do not stop halfway. Finish what I could not. The letter ended with a set of coordinates and a signature. Dad. Samuel stared at the page for a long time. Questions filled his mind. Why had his father hidden this? What was so important that it remained secret for decades? And how had the envelope ended up beneath the truck seat? He folded the letter carefully and slipped it into his jacket pocket. Looks like tomorrow just got busy. Rex stood immediately. Yeah, I know. You want to start tonight. The dog walked toward the old workshop behind the cabin and stopped. Then he looked back. Samuel followed his gaze. The workshop sat 50 yards away near the tree line. Its roof leaned slightly to one side. Moonlight reflected off dusty windows. Something about it suddenly felt different, less abandoned, as if it had been waiting. Samuel grabbed the lantern and stepped off the porch. Rex moved ahead without hesitation. Together, they crossed the yard toward the dark building. When they reached the workshop door, Samuel noticed fresh scratches near the handle. He froze. Those marks had not come from weather. Someone had touched this place recently. Before he could say a word, Rex let out a low growl and fixed his eyes on the shadows behind the workshop. Samuel slowly raised the lantern and scanned the darkness behind the workshop. The glow revealed stacks of rotting lumber, an old rain barrel, and thick weeds swaying in the mountain wind. Nothing moved, yet Rex remained frozen in place, every muscle tense. "What is it, boy?" Samuel asked quietly. The German Shepherd took 2 cautious steps forward and stared toward the tree line. Samuel listened carefully. For a moment, he heard only the wind. Then came the faint sound of an engine somewhere far down the mountain road. Headlights briefly flashed between distant trees before disappearing. Samuel frowned. That is strange. Nobody had driven up this road in years. Rex finally relaxed slightly, but his attention never left the forest. Samuel reached the workshop door and tested the handle. It creaked open immediately. Inside, dust covered nearly every surface. Rusted tools hung from pegboards. Shelves leaned under the weight of forgotten boxes. The smell of old wood and machine oil filled the air. Samuel stepped inside. "My father spent half his life in here." His voice echoed softly through the room. Rex entered beside him and immediately began sniffing the floor. Samuel remembered the instructions from the letter. Under the floorboards of the workshop, you will find a metal box. He lifted the lantern higher. The floor stretched nearly 20 feet across. Finding one hidden box beneath dozens of boards could take hours. "You heard the letter?" Samuel said with a tired smile. "It said to trust the dog." Rex's ears perked. Then, without hesitation, he walked across the workshop, past the workbench, past the shelves, past the old tool chest. Finally, he stopped near the far corner and pawed once at a section of floor. Samuel stared. "You cannot be serious." Rex pawed again. Samuel knelt and brushed away years of dust. One board looked slightly different from the others. Newer, less weathered. His pulse quickened. He grabbed an old pry bar hanging nearby and carefully worked the board loose. The wood lifted with a groan. Beneath it sat a small steel box. Samuel froze. "Well, I will be damned." Rex sat proudly beside the opening. Samuel laughed for the second time that night. "Good work, partner." He lifted the box onto the floor. Unlike everything else in the workshop, the metal container showed almost no rust. Someone had protected it carefully. A small brass latch secured the lid. Samuel opened it slowly. Inside rested a folded map, an old compass, and a black and white photograph. He picked up the picture first. It showed his father standing beside two unfamiliar men in front of a mountainside. All three appeared younger than Samuel remembered. On the back, someone had written a single sentence. The first entrance was sealed in October 1978. Samuel stared at the words. "First entrance?" he whispered. His heart began to pound. Then Rex suddenly stood and turned toward the workshop window. A low growl rolled from his throat. Samuel followed his gaze and saw something that made his stomach tighten. Fresh footprints were visible in the mud outside the building, and they were heading straight toward the cabin. Samuel set the photograph down and moved to the workshop door. Rex was already there, staring at the footprints outside. The lantern light revealed a clear trail in the mud. Whoever had been here wore heavy boots and had passed through recently. The edges were still sharp. Rain had not washed them away. "Someone knows about this place," Samuel said quietly. Rex let out a low rumble. Samuel looked down at him. "I know, I do not like it either." He stepped outside and followed the tracks toward the cabin. The night air felt colder now. The mountains seemed unusually silent. Even the wind had faded. Halfway across the yard, Samuel stopped. The footprints ended near the porch steps. Then they simply vanished. He frowned. "That makes no sense." Rex immediately began searching the area. His nose moved across the ground with focused determination. Samuel watched him work. The dog circled the porch twice before stopping near an old wooden bench beside the front door. Rex sniffed the bench, then looked directly at Samuel. "You found something?" Samuel walked over and lifted the bench lid. Inside sat an object covered in dust. It was a small leather journal. Samuel froze. He had never seen it before. Carefully opening the cover, he found his father's name written inside. "Another secret," he whispered. Back inside the cabin, Samuel placed the journal on the kitchen table. Rex lay nearby but remained alert. Samuel opened the first page. Most entries were ordinary. Weather observations. Repairs around the property. Notes about hunting and fishing. Then, several pages deeper, the writing changed. October 3, 1978. The first entrance has been secured. Nobody can find it unless they know where to look. Samuel leaned closer. His heart quickened. October 12, 1978. We agreed the second entrance would remain hidden. If anyone discovers the first location, they must never find the second. Samuel stared at the words. "Second entrance?" he murmured. The same phrase from the photograph. His father had not been hiding one secret. He had been hiding several. Then another passage caught his eye. March 8, 1982. If Samuel ever returns here after I am gone, tell him to trust the map and trust the dog. Samuel slowly leaned back in his chair. A strange feeling settled over him. His father had written those words decades ago, yet somehow everything seemed connected to this exact moment. Rex lifted his head and looked toward the window. The dog suddenly stood. "What is it?" Samuel asked. Rex walked to the glass and stared outside into the darkness. Samuel joined him. At first, he saw nothing. Then, far beyond the cabin near the edge of the forest, a brief light flickered between the trees. Once. Twice. Then it disappeared. Samuel's stomach tightened. Someone was out there watching the property. Before he could react, Rex barked sharply and ran to the door. At the same moment, Samuel noticed a folded piece of paper wedged beneath the cabin door that had not been there a minute earlier. Samuel stared at the folded paper beneath the door for several seconds before carefully picking it up. The sheet was dry, despite the damp night air. Someone had placed it there only moments ago. Rex stood beside him, staring into the darkness beyond the porch. Samuel unfolded the note. A single sentence had been written in black ink. You are not the only one following the map. Samuel felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. Well, that is comforting, he muttered. Rex gave a low growl. Samuel looked down at him. I know. Whoever left this wanted us to see it. He stepped onto the porch and scanned the tree line again, but the forest remained still and silent. No lights, no movement, nothing. Eventually, he closed the door and returned to the table. The journal, photograph, map, and note now sat side by side beneath the lantern glow. Samuel unfolded the map for the first time. It showed the surrounding mountains in remarkable detail. Hand-drawn markings crossed valleys and ridges. Several locations had been circled in red pencil. One circle immediately caught his attention. It rested less than a mile from the cabin, near an abandoned mining trail he remembered from childhood. Beside it, his father had written 3 words. Start here first. Samuel leaned closer. Why there? Rex suddenly stood and placed both front paws on the table. His nose touched the lower corner of the map. What did you find? Samuel asked. He looked closer and noticed something he had missed. A faint symbol had been drawn near the red circle. It matched the symbol stamped onto the brass compass from the metal box. Samuel picked up the compass and turned it over. On the back was a small inscription, Northridge marker. This was not just a map, he whispered. It is a set of directions. Rex wagged his tail once. Samuel smiled. You are getting pretty good at this. Hours passed as he studied every detail. Eventually, exhaustion began to catch up with him. The events of the day felt unreal. 24 hours earlier, he had left a courthouse with almost nothing. Now he sat inside his father's abandoned cabin surrounded by clues to a mystery decades old. Before turning in for the night, he folded the map and slipped it into his jacket. Tomorrow morning, we check the trail. Rex immediately lifted his head. I figured you would approve. The dog followed him upstairs to a small bedroom overlooking the valley. The room contained little more than an old bed, a dresser, and a window facing the mountains. Samuel lay awake for a long time listening to the sounds of the forest. Sometime after midnight, Rex suddenly jumped off the floor and moved to the window. His ears stood straight up. Samuel sat up instantly. What is it? Rex stared toward the distant hillside. Samuel followed his gaze and saw something that made his pulse race. Far across the valley, a single light moved slowly through the darkness. Not a vehicle, not a house. Someone carrying a flashlight. And whoever it was appeared to be heading directly toward the location marked by the red circle on the map. Samuel barely slept for the rest of the night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the moving light crossing the mountainside. By dawn, pale sunlight filtered through the cabin window. Rex was already awake, sitting beside the door as if he had been waiting for orders. Samuel pulled on his jacket and checked the map again. The red circle sat less than a mile away. Looks like we have a destination, he said. Rex immediately stood. Yeah, I figured you would say that. After a quick breakfast, they left the cabin and followed the old mining trail winding through the pines. The morning air was cold enough to sting his lungs. Frost covered the grass. The deeper they moved into the forest, the quieter everything became. 40 minutes later, Samuel stopped and unfolded the map again. We should be close. Rex suddenly moved ahead, nose low to the ground. The German shepherd began pulling toward a narrow ridge hidden behind thick brush. Samuel followed. What did you find now? The dog squeezed through the brush and emerged onto a small clearing overlooking the valley. Samuel froze. Someone had been there recently. A portable camp chair sat beside a cold fire ring. Empty water bottles rested near a fallen log. Fresh boot prints covered the ground. So I was not imagining things. He slowly surveyed the area. Whoever had camped there had a perfect view of both the cabin and the trail. Rex sniffed around the campsite before stopping near a flat rock. He barked once. Samuel walked over and discovered a small notebook partially hidden beneath the stone. Most pages were blank. Several had been torn out. Only one sentence remained written inside. The second entrance is real. Samuel stared at the words. Second entrance. The same phrase again. His father had written it. The photograph mentioned it. Now someone else was searching for it, too. A knot formed in his stomach. "Who are you?" he whispered. Rex suddenly stiffened. His ears pointed toward the ridge above them. Samuel listened. Footsteps. Not close, but unmistakable. Someone was moving through the trees. Samuel immediately crouched beside a fallen log. The footsteps stopped. Silence followed. Nearly a full minute passed. Then a voice called from somewhere beyond the pines. "You should leave while you still can." Samuel's eyes widened. The voice belonged to an older man. Calm, controlled, not threatening, just certain. Samuel stood slowly. "Who are you?" No answer came. "Did you leave the note?" he shouted. The forest remained silent. Then the voice spoke again, farther away now. "Your father tried to protect it. Do not make the mistake of uncovering everything." Samuel rushed toward the sound, but by the time he reached the ridge, nobody was there. Only trees and shadows. Rex searched frantically across the hillside before stopping beside a cluster of boulders. The dog began pawing at the ground. Samuel approached and brushed away leaves from the base of the rocks. Hidden beneath decades of dirt was a rusted metal hatch built directly into the mountainside. Samuel knelt beside the rusted hatch and brushed away the remaining dirt. The metal surface was old, but not nearly as old as it should have been. Someone had cleaned part of it recently. Rex continued pawing beside the edge until Samuel gently touched his shoulder. "Easy, partner. We found it." The German Shepherd stepped back, but remained alert. Samuel examined the hatch carefully. A circular locking mechanism sat in the center. Years ago, it might have looked intimidating. Now it looked strangely familiar. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the brass compass from the metal box. The symbol engraved on its back matched the symbol stamped onto the hatch. Samuel stared at both pieces. No way. Slowly, he pressed the compass into the center of the lock. A soft click echoed beneath the mountain. Samuel froze. Rex immediately stood and looked toward the trees. "You heard that too?" Samuel asked. Another click followed. Then the lock released. For several seconds, neither moved. Samuel finally lifted the heavy hatch. Cold air drifted upward from the darkness below. A narrow staircase disappeared into the mountain. "My father really did hide something down here." Rex leaned forward and sniffed the opening. His tail remained still. Samuel grabbed his flashlight from his pack and aimed the beam downward. Concrete walls, metal railings, dry steps. This was not an old mine. Someone had built this deliberately. "Well, partner," Samuel said quietly, "I guess we came this far." Together they descended. The staircase stretched nearly 30 feet underground before ending at a steel door. Dust covered the floor, but something immediately caught Samuel's attention. Footprints. Fresh ones. "We are not first," he whispered. Rex growled softly. Samuel pushed the steel door open. Beyond it sat a small underground room. Shelves lined the walls. Filing cabinets stood in neat rows. A wooden table occupied the center. Most surprising of all, electricity once existed there. Old light fixtures still hung from the ceiling. Samuel slowly turned in a circle. What was this place? On the table rested a single folder. Unlike everything else, it had been left out in the open. Samuel opened it carefully. Inside he found documents, photographs, and newspaper clippings. One photograph immediately stopped him cold. It showed his father standing beside the same two men from the old picture. Only now all three wore official government identification badges. Samuel's eyes widened. "Dad, what were you involved in?" He turned another page and found a typed report. Most of the text had faded, but one line remained readable. "Project Northridge Archive Relocation. Authorized personnel only. Samuel frowned. Archive? Relocation? None of it made sense. Then he noticed something else. A recent note had been placed on top of the documents. The paper looked new. Someone had left it only days ago. Samuel unfolded it. The message contained just 6 words. You found the wrong entrance first. Before Samuel could react, Rex suddenly barked and ran toward a far wall hidden in shadow. There, partially concealed behind an old cabinet, stood another steel door that was hanging slightly open. Samuel slowly approached the partially open steel door, while Rex stood rigid beside him. The German shepherd's eyes never left the darkness beyond the doorway. "Stay close," Samuel whispered. He pushed the door wider and swept his flashlight into the room. What he saw on the other side stopped him cold. This chamber was far larger than the first one. Shelves stretched along the walls from floor to ceiling. Dozens of sealed storage cases sat stacked in careful rows. Dust covered most surfaces, yet several footprints crossed the floor. Someone had definitely been here recently. Rex moved ahead, sniffing carefully. Samuel followed. "This is not an archive," he murmured. "This is a vault." At the center of the room stood a long table, covered with maps, documents, and old photographs. One picture immediately caught his attention. It showed his father standing beside a younger version of the man whose voice Samuel had heard in the forest. The same face. Older now, but unmistakable. Samuel picked up the photograph. Written on the back were 2 names, Robert Carter, Thomas Mercer, partners, 1978. "Thomas Mercer," Samuel repeated quietly. "You are the one who has been watching this place." He continued searching through the papers. Most described land purchases, survey routes, and geological reports from decades earlier. Then he found a thick envelope marked personal. Inside rested a letter addressed directly to him. Samuel sat down and unfolded it. Rex immediately settled beside his chair. "My son, if you are reading this, then you found the second entrance. That means Rex succeeded where I always hoped he would." Samuel smiled faintly. "You hear that? Dad was counting on you." Rex wagged his tail once. Samuel continued reading. "Thomas Mercer and I spent years protecting something hidden beneath this mountain. Not because it was dangerous, but because greed would eventually destroy it. We promised that only one of our families would decide its future. If you found this room, then that responsibility belongs to you now." Samuel's heart pounded. He turned the page. "The greatest secret is not in this vault. It is beneath it. Use the final key." Inside the envelope sat a small brass key attached to a faded leather tag. Samuel stared at it. There is another level. Before he could examine it further, a voice suddenly echoed from the far side of the room. "Your father always knew you would find it." Samuel jumped to his feet and turned. An elderly man stood near the entrance. Gray hair, weathered face, calm eyes, he carried no weapon and made no threatening move. Rex barked once but did not advance. The man nodded toward the dog. "Smart animal." Samuel tightened his grip on the letter. "Thomas Mercer?" The man smiled sadly. I was beginning to wonder how long it would take. Samuel took a cautious step forward. "You left the notes. You followed us." Thomas nodded. "Because I needed to know whether you were worthy of what waits below." Then he pointed toward a heavy steel hatch built into the floor beneath the table. "And now it is time for you to learn why your father sacrificed so much to protect it." Samuel looked from Thomas Mercer to the steel hatch built into the floor. For a moment, the underground room fell silent except for the faint hum of air moving through old ventilation shafts. "My father gave his life protecting this?" Samuel asked. Thomas nodded slowly. "Not because it was worth millions, because it was worth more than that." Samuel frowned. "What could possibly be worth more?" Thomas stepped forward and pointed to the brass key in Samuel's hand. "The truth." Samuel approached the hatch and inserted the key into the lock. It turned smoothly despite the years. A heavy click echoed through the chamber. Together, Samuel and Thomas lifted the hatch. Beneath, it was a short staircase leading to a smaller room. Rex moved first, descending carefully. Samuel followed. At the bottom stood a single, fireproof cabinet and a large wooden chest. No gold, no stacks of cash, no hidden treasure. Samuel looked confused. "This is what they protected?" Thomas smiled. "Open it." Samuel knelt beside the chest and lifted the lid. Inside were hundreds of documents, land deeds, historical records, journals, photographs, and legal files. He picked up the first folder and stared in disbelief. The records showed ownership of thousands of acres throughout the valley, properties that had been quietly placed into a conservation trust decades earlier. Land protected from developers, speculators, and corporations. Land that supplied water to nearby communities and preserved the forests surrounding the mountains. Samuel slowly turned another page, then another. His father's name appeared everywhere, so did Thomas's. "They wanted to keep this from being sold," Samuel whispered. Thomas nodded. "Your father believed some things should belong to future generations, not the highest bidder." Samuel felt his throat tighten. All those years he had thought his father was simply living alone in a forgotten cabin. The truth was far greater. The old man had spent decades protecting something that benefited thousands of people. Then Samuel found one final document. His eyes widened. The trust named him as successor. Every responsibility, every decision, everything now belonged under his care. "Why me?" Samuel asked quietly. Thomas looked directly at him. "Because your father trusted your character more than anyone else's." For several seconds, Samuel could not speak. Only days earlier, he had walked out of a courthouse believing he had lost everything. Now he understood that the most important inheritance had never been money. It was purpose. Rex suddenly barked and nudged Samuel's arm. He looked down and discovered a final envelope hidden beneath the documents. Inside was a handwritten note. "My son, if you found this, then you finally came home. Life may take houses, savings, and comfort, but it cannot take integrity. Take care of this land. Take care of yourself, and thank the dog." Samuel laughed through moist eyes. "That sounds like him." Thomas chuckled. "It does." Months later, the story spread throughout the valley. The trust became public. The protected land remained preserved. Samuel moved permanently into the restored cabin and accepted his father's role. People who once overlooked him now respected him, not because of wealth, but because of what he chose to protect. On the cabin porch one evening, Samuel watched the sunset paint the mountains gold. Rex rested beside him, older but as loyal as ever. Samuel scratched behind the dog's ears and smiled. "You know, partner, none of this happens without you." Rex lifted his head proudly. For the first time in many years, Samuel felt something he thought he had lost forever. Not success, not revenge. Peace. And as the sun disappeared behind the mountains his father had loved, home no longer felt like a place he returned to. It felt like a future he had finally found. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. If you enjoyed this story, please like, subscribe, and share it with friends who might enjoy it too. We would love to know where you are watching from. Tell us your city and country in the comments. More heartfelt and unforgettable hero dog stories are already waiting for you. See you in the next one.